News!
Okay, we'll start with this. Emaine Califf's lawyer has revealed that J.K. Rowling and Elon Musk are among the notable figures named within her legal case, which alleges aggravated cyber harassment over her gender eligibility controversy at the Olympics. Her lawyer said the criminal complaint is filed against quote-unquote unknown persons, enabling the prosecution under French law to investigate anyone on Twitter for their comments about her. What we're asking is that the prosecution investigates not only these people, but whoever it feels necessary. If the case goes to court, they will stand trial.
What?
You're talking about some very powerful people that can more than cover their legal fees. You're talking about J.K. Rowling. You're talking about Elon Musk, one of the most powerful men in the world. And these are the people you want to take to court
For cyberbullying.
Well, it's important to note that neither Elon Musk or J.K. Rowling are responsible for the treatment the fighter may have received during these games or what was being said online. Angela Carini has more to do with that and what bits and pieces of information came out during the games via the IBA.
What stoked this flame that if you were going after those who are responsible, I would think that the IBA and maybe Angela Carini, more than Elon Musk and J.K. Rowling, are the catalysts.
You go after them specifically, for anything they may have said or any reaction they may have had online. It's not any different than any reaction than anyone else would have had. So you're going to end up trying to take a lot of people to court.
On what grounds?
Sure, whatever reaction Elon had or J.K. Rowling had is no different than many of the other reactions I've seen people had to this entire controversy. So why would you single them out?
Because they have money.
They'll say it's because they have influence. They'll say it's because they're public figures and what they say is seen by a lot of people. Though underneath it all, I'd say if you're going after these two and anybody like them, it has more to do with their money than anything they may have said.
Because a lot of people said a lot of things. A lot of people all around the world. Are you going to take them all to court?
Not familiar with French law and how things work over there, but what are we talking about? Punitive damages?
Okay, then, so what did Elon Musk and J.K. Rowling say that costed you any money?
What damages? I mean, if Parisian law is anything like American law, what exactly are you suing for? Because it's not like you were booted out of the Olympic Games as a result of anything they said.
It's not like you weren't allowed to compete. You were allowed to compete. You were allowed to finish.
Nothing they said stopped the IOC from allowing you to participate in these Olympic Games. So if you're taking them to court and suing them and somebody else, what exactly would you be suing for?
Cyberbullying.
And what exactly constitutes cyberbullying? Having an opinion on a controversial story that everybody knows about? What, because you didn't like Elon's opinion or you didn't like J.K. Rowling's opinion? There are a lot of people that have the same opinion they do. What constitutes the cyberbullying?
What entitles you to take them to court?
If they are reacting to anything, it's what the IBA said. So ideally, you would be trying to take the IBA to court.
They're the ones who made all of the public statements that Emaine Califf and one other athlete were banned in the previous year, that they did not meet their specified qualifications to compete in this category. They're the ones that said that those two athletes were biologically male.
Thus, ideally, they would be the ones that you go after. A little bit surprised that they were not among the names mentioned for this proposed lawsuit.
Is it because you know that if you try to take them to court, the results that you tried to suppress, the results you tried to stop them from talking about, those results might come out in the IBA's effort to defend themselves? Is that why you're not going after them?
Because they ain't mentioned here.
Seems like a frivolity, a frivolous lawsuit. You're going to sue Elon for having an opinion and J.K. Rowling?
Who else? So let's say that you're in Paris and let's just say J.K. Rowling is in Marbella.
Hypothetically.
Costa Rica, just somewhere else in the world at the time that they make a tweet that you feel defames or dehumanizes you. If they're in a different country at the time that they make a tweet Whose laws are you going to try them under? What if they weren't in Paris at the time? If they weren't in Paris, then technically they didn't break any rules. They didn't break any laws.
What if Elon Musk was in Montana at the time he made a tweet that you didn't like?
Does that constitute breaking a rule or breaking a law in Paris when he wasn't even there? It's a frivolity. It's a frivolous lawsuit because the scrutiny that Emain Khalif has been under through the duration of these Olympic Games has less to do with Elon and J.K. Rowling and more to do with the IBA and their explosive accusations that you haven't denounced.
Haven't disproven them.
And what has since come out since all of this started suggests that the IBA wasn't lying.
So many tried to discredit the IBA due to match fixing and corruption, conflating these two things that have nothing to do with each other.
Because what the hell does alleged match fixing within the IBA have to do with your eligibility to compete in this category based on your karyotype?
What do those two things have to do with each other?
As well as some testimony regarding all of this from outside of the IBA, concerned individuals that felt Emain Khalif should not have been allowed to compete in this category.
Surprised that none of their names came up, but Elon Musk and J.K. Rowling, their names did. Gee, it seems to me you're after money.
Because you're going after them instead of the actual catalysts.
They didn't start this.
You'll excuse me for saying so, but it's a bit presumptuous to think that you can afford to get into a legal battle with these kinds of people who might decide to make an example out of you.
If they get it in their head that this is just the shakedown and you're just a grifter,
things could get ugly. They could.
We'll see what happens.
In men's super middleweight news, David Benavidez versus David Morrell Jr. at light heavyweight would be a war, says PBC spokesman. David Benavidez and David Morrell Jr. are on similar tracks. Both were at super middleweight hoping for big opportunities, especially a fight with champion Canelo Alvarez, and both have since moved up to light heavyweight. For Benavidez, that jump to 175 came in June, when he outpointed former lineal light heavyweight champion Alexander Vajdik in the co-feature bout on the Gervonta Davis versus Frank Martin pay-per-view. For Morrell, his move to light heavyweight came, 2 weeks ago against Radavoje Kalajdzic on the undercard of Crawford versus Madrimov. For me and my money, he did all right.
I'll say that I liked his light heavyweight debut a little better than David Benavidez's debut. I liked it a little better because several times in the Kalajdzic fight, you saw that David Morrell hurt him. You saw that he stunned him, that he staggered him. He just didn't finish him. He didn't knock him out.
And this is a guy with 11, 12 fights total, a grand total of 11 or 12 fights, not that much experience, not that many rounds in the bank, campaigning at a new weight, so it's negligible. But for me, David Morrell didn't look half bad, whereas David Benavidez, who is considerably more experienced than David Morrell, a lot more pro experience, a lot more pro fights, more rounds in the bank.
He didn't impress me.
For me, David Morrell's light heavyweight debut was a bit better. He's another guy that has just sort of abandoned 168 because the fight that everybody wants at 168 is just not available to him or David Benavidez, said Tim Smith, the Vice President of Communications at Heyman Sports. Speaking to Kurt Emhoff on the Boxing Esquire podcast, both Benavidez and Morrell have worked regularly with Heyman's PBC. I know a lot of people are like, he should fight David Benavidez. Well, at 175, that might end up happening. We'll see. That would be a war. That would be an absolute war. Morrell had a pair of early nights last year, putting away Yamaguchi Falcao in 1 round and Sana Agbeko in 2.
I think his power carried.
David Morrell is at a different level at this point, Smith said. Not a lot of people want to get in the ring with him. He's got some really heavy hands and he's very skilled. He's been working with trainer Ronnie Shields, and I think that has truly helped him.
So can we expect to see David Morrell fight David Benavidez on the premise that they're both campaigning at the same weight once again, and they fight on the same side of the street, that in terms of politics and all of that stuff, there shouldn't be any?
Well, I'll tell you something. Samson Lukowicz started off last year saying that they had signed a contract to fight David Morrell later on in the year. Later on in the year, David ended up fighting, I think it was Caleb Plant, then Demetrius Andrade, but not David Morrell. No, not David.
You didn't fight him.
So now they're at the same weight, and David Benavidez's name has been attached to a fight with the winner of Better Beeve versus Bivol.
David is supposed to have first dibs. Turkey's willing to pay for it. I don't think he's gonna do it.
That's all supposed to happen next year, where the outcome of that fight is supposed to happen this one in October. Beterbiev versus Bivol is said to be happening in October. David Benavidez is set to be returning to the ring in December.
You think he fights David Morrell?
No. Stylistically, I think David Morrell has the right style for the job, the right physical dimensions, and the right punching power to where they're not going to roll the dice with him. I would be surprised if they do.
They'll fight somebody else. They won't fight him.
Stylistically, I think David Morrell is a more nuanced fighter, more streamlined than David Benavidez. With David, what you see is what you get. A big guy, really big guy that throws a lot of punches.
He's a bit flat-footed.
Flat-footed plotter, not much of a boxer. He's got some speed in those hands, though I wouldn't say he has that much power.
He was stronger at 168.
But not so devastating at 175. I think David Benavidez, who has more of a profile than David Morrell, really is stuck between a rock and a hard place, because the expectation is that he's supposed to fight the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol, who I think would beat him, whoever it is, whether it's Artur or Dimitri.
They beat him.
The David Morrell fight, compared to that fight, is a more winnable fight against a less experienced fighter, but I think David Morrell would beat him too. And I don't think David Benavidez wants to roll the dice. I don't think his team does, which creates another problem. The longer you put this off, the more experience you let him gain, the better a fighter he becomes.
So maybe the ideal time for that fight was last year, when he was a little less experienced, a little greener.
Ideal for David Benavidez, I mean, because the more you put this off, the more fights you allow him to have. Learning fights, developmental fights, further allowing him to acclimate to this division.
And this is what I mean when I say that David is stuck between a rock and a hard place.
There are people that are expecting you to face the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol, now that you're WBC interim champion. And even if you don't want to do that right away, if you want to put it off, it's not exactly like you're safe at 175 fighting the other 175-pounders. There are some big punchers up there.
David Morrell is just one.
It's a legitimate argument that he chased David Benavidez up there, knowing that he was leaving 168. He followed him, and they're on the same side of the street, so why shouldn't they make it?
Same reason they didn't make Carlos Adames versus Erislandy Lara, because there's no money in it.
If and when David returns in December, I don't think he's fighting David Morrell.
He never wanted that fight, and he still doesn't.
Elsewhere in the world of boxing, veteran fighter Derek Chisora on Charlo and Jermall Charlo, him and his brother talk too much. Those guys talk too much. They can't fight. They're all hype. They talk too much and they can't fight. He got worked by Canelo Alvarez. They talk too much, bro.
Very recently, Derek Chisora sat down with Radio Raheem of Seconds Out, and he talked about how, American fighters, they're good for the talk, but they're not that good at backing it up. What would seem blasphemy a couple of years ago if you would have said something like that about American fighters these days.
I say it myself here on the channel all the time, that American fighters and American boxing just ain't what it used to be, and this ain't your father's era of boxing, that what American boxers like to do is play on familiar tropes and tired old gimmicks, outdated ones.
They think they're better than everybody else. Better just because they're from America?
I'll tell you what, that if either Jermell or Jermall, or the both of them, if they don't like what Derek Chisora said, they can take it up with Derek Chisora and see how he reacts, see how he responds, because this ain't Joe Blow in the comment section of a YouTube video.
Johnny Boxing Fan Online on Twitter.
If you've got a problem with what Derek said, take it up with Derek. Derek Chisora, who was in action not that long ago against Joe Joyce in a fight that a lot of people were favoring Derek to lose, Derek won.
He knocked Joe down.
Now what he's saying is that he's open to a Dillian Whyte trilogy after the battle with Joe Joyce. He teased at a December date in Manchester, and a trilogy with Dillian Whyte, that could be an option. The pair famously put on a classic fight for the British title at the Manchester Arena 8 years ago, with Whyte winning by a narrow margin. They then competed in a rematch 2 years later, but this time, Whyte knocked out Chisora, knocked him unconscious, in a highly competitive fight. Now, after Whyte's inactivity due to adverse findings in ped tests and Chisora's victory over Joyce, a third encounter could take place. I will have a rematch with Dillian Whyte. As long as he's clean, 100%, said Chisora. There is no point in fighting someone who is not clean, but if he wants a rematch, I'll give it to him.
A funny old game, this boxing.
Dillian Whyte, I think he's some years younger than Derek Chisora. Certainly not as weathered as Derek. Derek's actually got losses in the double digits, whereas Dillian, he's got less than a handful.
A funny old game, this boxing.
But it's Derek Chisora. Derek Chisora, the veteran fighter, the gatekeeper, whatever you want to call him. It's Derek's career that actually has a lot more momentum, more traction than Dillian. In spite of Dillian having beaten him 2 times on paper.
One of those 2 times by way of knockout.
It's actually Derek who's on the up and up. It's actually Derek's whose career has more traction and more momentum. So when someone as seasoned, as experienced, as a Derek Chisora takes shots at the Charlo brothers.
Well, that's a bit different than when either me or you say something about the Charlo brothers.
The Charlo brothers were supposed to be 2 Texas bad boys. I've actually seen them snap at the media. Snap at Derek.
I saw one of them get real disrespectful with a fan online that was trying to conduct an interview.
And that was on Instagram, I think. No, I don't disagree with Derek when he says that these 2 guys, they like to talk. They do. They're big mouths, the both of them. They fancy themselves bad boys.
But didn't Jamal get the shit slapped out of him? Didn't he get the taste slapped out of his mouth by Caleb Plant and didn't do nothing about it?
Didn't that happen? Didn't Jermel Charlo spend years talking about a Canelo fight? He would do this to Canelo. He would do that to Canelo. Just so that when he gets the fight, he spends the whole time running away from Canelo.
It was embarrassing.
The Charlo brothers as a package, as a unit, are an embarrassment.
Embarrassing.
I know that a lot of people in the American boxing scene like a good talker, a good trash talker, a fighter with the gift of gab, and a bad boy in some instances. And that's what these 2 try to be, along with many other American fighters. And they've got the talking part down.
But not the backing it up part. That's the part they don't have down. I mean, look at Adrian Broner. He's a talented trash talker. How many times has he stood on a podium and said this and that just to end up getting in the ring and getting his ass kicked?
Remember that he was talking smack to Manny Pacquiao just to get dominated by Manny Pacquiao. In more recent years, he was talking smack to Blair Cobbs.
How did that work out?
He got sat on his back pocket and lost the 2. See, Americans seem to have an affinity for the trash talker, the trash-talking boxer, but today's trash talker is little more than just a loudmouth. Very few of these talkative boxers can back it up.
Like the Charlos.
Loud and aggressive with a head full of peroxide. Who are you 2 supposed to be, Simon Phoenix?
Huh?
Tell you what.
What?
I don't think they do a goddamn thing to Derek about what he said, because I think he'd smack the both of them up. I think he'd beat them both at the same time on the same night.
That's what I think.
I watched Caleb Plant smack the shit out of one of these guys, and a guy didn't do nothing about it.
Ain't gonna do nothing to Derek.
Not gonna do a goddamn thing.